you talked about weak men and strong men. And so I want to just put a little twist
and gentlemen.
on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, gentlemen. Yes.
There's three levels.
I want to put a
categories.
twist on that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at what constitutes weak. All right. So if you look at the way that human beings develop neurobiologically, what you see is that from birth to the age of 3, human beings are basically, you could conceptualize them as, you could conceptualize the baby and the toddler as a sequence of instinctive drives. Now, drive isn't exactly a good metaphor because these systems aren't deterministic. They're more like personalities than they are like drives. But you come into the world with a set of motivations intact and a set of emotions operative. And so the motivations are orientations of aim, let's say towards physical contact, towards play, towards physical gratification, towards hunger, thirst, temperature regulation, the basic subsystems that orient you so that you don't collapse physically, let's say. And the emotional systems are basically a positive emotion that attracts you to things and negative emotion that freezes you or causes you to retreat. Now, an immature person who is a weak person, let's say, because we're going to equate those. An immature person is someone who's still dominated by those systems. And so a 2-year-old moves from the domination of one motivational system to another. And it isn't till they're about 3 that they can start to integrate with other people. That's when they start to learn to play. Okay, so now the reason I'm saying that is because we can associate that weakness that you described. Weak and immature are the same. And they're the same as hedonistic. And they're the same as present-oriented. And they're the same as unable to delay gratification. And they're the same as narcissistic and narrowly self-centered. That's all the same. And like a variant of that would be criminal as well. Okay, now, one way of controlling that is with power. And that's the strong men that you're describing, literally the strong man. The strong man is someone who controls the hedonists with an iron fist. And then if you look at the postmodernists, the postmodern neo-Marxists, they would say that's the whole playing field. There's just power. There's just hedonism. There's nothing else. But that gentleman that you described, that's that integration that we were talking about earlier. That's civilized integration. And it is the basis of, it's the basis of mental health, I believe, which is quite a radical claim. Like, you cannot, and I think you see this, for example, in the data that show that liberal, progressive young women who are like fragmented and hedonistic and immature, they're rife with mental illness, depression, and anxiety. They're dominated by negative emotion and have very little hope. And it's because they're not integrated. And so what the men that you described as gentlemen are actually integrated and mature. And their ethos isn't weak hedonism or power. Their ethos, this is something I really want to develop at ARC, and in the next book I'm writing, their ethos is one of voluntary self-sacrifice. Right? And that it's voluntary. So the voluntary sacrifice is present to future. Right? So you sacrifice the present to the future. That's control of delay of gratification. And you satisfy and you sacrifice your subjugation to your own whims to communal stability and productivity. Right? And that's what happens. Kids start to learn to do that at the age of 3 when they develop friendships. They learn to delay gratification. They learn to take turns and to have friends, which is very much akin to delaying gratification. And that's voluntary self-sacrifice. That is the foundation of civilization. That's central to the Christian ethos, for example, and it's laid out in the Old Testament writings as well, the ethos of sacrifice, let's say. And so I think we're at the point where we can actually understand this. And my sense is that a return to first principles is going to involve a conscious understanding this time of the ethos on which our civilization is founded. And I'm curious about your ideas about that. See, because I can't see how it can be any other way. Like, to be civilized means to be social, reciprocal, right? And to be social means you're not selfish. But then you might ask, well, what does selfish means? Well, it means you're not governed by your immediate whims. Well, then what are you governed by? You're governed by an impulse to integrate yourself internally with the future and with other people. And that's deeply enough embedded in human beings, so I don't think there's any difference between that and the instinct to develop and mature. And that's part of that hero's journey path, right? That's the pathway to maturation that produces that gentlemanly behavior upon which civilization is founded. And I can't see, how would you argue against that? Like, you could do what Foucault does and say, well, there's nothing but power. It's like, well, Foucault believed that because he wanted to rape little boys in graveyards and have that be okay. You know, I mean, he thought of power as the ultimate deity because he was trying to justify his own pathology. And there's plenty of that on the progressive and hedonistic side of the conceptual world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is why I was so excited to talk to you, Jordan, because I think, well, we talked last time also about narcissism and nihilism, and I think since it's almost been a year and we've been working on our book still on that gets at these issues, I think we have a better picture of what's happened. And first of all, when you have your liberal democratic civilization with respect for human dignity and human equality and free speech threatened, you get more grounded. I mean, I was concerned around the ways in which the most civilized people, the elites, have been undermining civilization since really my first and second book, both on the environment and on homelessness, undermining, for example, the security of a city, making cities dangerous again. We just saw in Los Angeles, I've been writing about defunding the police for years. We just learned in Los Angeles that they had been defunding the fire department. That's how far the degradation of civilization had gone. And I knew as soon as it happened that there would be voices right away who would say that there was nothing that could have been done about it because humans were doomed by climate change. How could we possibly protect ourselves from a fire? I mean, who could ever imagine there being fires in the most fiery part of the United States, right? Like, I mean, it's insane. So but I think we have a better picture now, Jordan, too, where, you get this really precious, just this tiny moment of this thing we call the Enlightenment. Of course, it comes out of 1,500 years of Christianity, but we get this period, really 17th century, 18th century, really, 18th century, where there have been all these wars and everyone's, Hobbes and everybody's tired of them. And they're like, we have to have order. You have to have civilization. And then Locke comes in and amends that and says, you also have to protect the citizenry from each other. But you have still a picture of what it means to be a citizen, right? And it is tied to this idea of being a gentleman. And we're also trying to teach this at University of Austin. But it's a picture that a citizen, it's not just something, yes, you're a citizen by fact of being born in that nation, yes, but there's this older idea of the citizen, which came from older Europe, which was that to be a citizen was something that was a privilege and an honor, and it came with some intense responsibilities. And you're in service, so you sort of say, what is it? The gentleman is in service of civilization, of peace, of prosperity, of freedom, of reproduction, of continuing the civilization, there's a picture of an evolution of human consciousness, as we've talked about before, that, gets into trouble when the stories that Christians had told start to get challenged, by Copernicus, Galileo, Darwin. We get to the crisis of meaning. We get to nihilism, the death of God. We had two first bad waves of a totalitarian nihilistic response to the death of God in fascism and communism, they get repressed and we push away, but then we get this thing we call wokeism, and it develops and develops after the fall of communism, really starting in the early 90s, and then fully comes to its just deranged, mad power with the woke reign of terror, exercising this just wanton aggression and nihilism